Sometimes the people we overlook carry the deepest scars and the greatest stories. Sometimes a man's worth has nothing to do with the clothes on his back. Cole Tanner rode into Silver Ridge looking like any other drifter. Dusty boots, torn sleeve, quiet eyes that had seen too much. Evelyn Chambers, the town's wealthiest widow, didn't hesitate to mock him in front of everyone. Then his sleeve tore wider. A scar appeared. The whole town went silent. That mark belonged to a war hero they thought was dead, a captain who saved their valley and vanished without a word. But why did he leave his medals behind? And what brought him back now? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 8 years is a long time to live with ghosts. Cole Tanner had spent nearly 3,000 days in the high country, and each morning he woke to the same question. Had he made the right choice? His cabin sat tucked into a granite shelf halfway up the western slope of Iron Peak, hidden among lodgepole pines and Douglas fir. He'd built it himself that first winter after leaving Silver Ridge Valley, working through snow and bitter cold with hands that still remembered how to swing an axe, even if they'd forgotten how to hold a sword. The structure was simple but solid. One room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft, and windows positioned to catch the morning sun and watch the valley below. From his porch, on clear days, he could see Silver Ridge itself, just a smudge of buildings in the distance, barely visible through the haze of wood smoke and mountain air. He told himself he wasn't watching the town. He told himself he didn't care what happened down there anymore. But every evening, as the sun set behind the western peaks, he found himself standing in that same spot, looking down at the life he'd abandoned. The cabin held everything he needed and nothing he didn't. A narrow bed with wool blankets, a table he'd hewn from a single pine log, shelves lined with provisions, dried venison, beans, flour, coffee. His rifle hung above the door. His fishing gear occupied one corner. Books, a dozen volumes he'd carried up the mountain, filled another shelf. Homer, Plutarch, Whitman, words that reminded him civilization still existed somewhere beyond his self-imposed exile. In the back corner, hanging from a wooden peg and covered with an old feed sack, was his cavalry jacket. Union blue, though the color had faded to something closer to gray. The brass buttons were still bright because he'd never been able to stop himself from polishing them, even after all these years. Captain's insignia on the shoulders. A bullet hole through the left breast that had missed his heart by 2 inches during the Battle of Cedar Creek. Dark stains on the right sleeve where Confederate saber had cut deep, giving him the scar he now carried like a brand. He hadn't worn the jacket since the day he climbed this mountain, hadn't even looked at it in months. But he couldn't bring himself to burn it or bury it. Some part of him, the part that had led men through fire and watched them die with his name on their lips, wouldn't let that life disappear completely. His days followed a rhythm as regular as seasons. Rise before dawn, start the fire, boil coffee strong enough to strip rust, eat whatever needed eating, usually cornmeal mush or yesterday's biscuits. Then work, always work, chopping wood for winter, hunting for meat, tending his small garden in the brief mountain summer, fishing the cold streams that tumbled down from the peaks, mending tools, repairing the cabin, keeping his weapons clean and oiled. The work kept his body strong and his mind occupied. Mostly occupied. There were still nights when sleep wouldn't come, when he'd lie in his loft, watching shadows dance across the ceiling and remembering things he'd rather forget. Not the war itself. He'd made peace with that violence, understood its necessity. No, what haunted him were the faces of men he'd failed after the war ended. Samuel Pritchard, James Donovan, William Chen, Robert Youngblood. All veterans who'd served under him, trusted him, followed him into hell and back. Men who'd been promised land grants for their service, small plots where they could build homes and raise families and live out their days in the peace they'd fought to secure. Men who'd been cheated. Cole had discovered the truth by accident. 3 months after the war ended, while he was still in Silver Ridge helping with reconstruction, he'd been at the land office reviewing his own grant papers. The clerk, A nervous man named Hodges had stepped away, leaving a ledger open on the desk. Cole's eyes had wandered across the page, and he'd seen names he recognized. Samuel Pritchard's name, but the notation beside it read, "Claim withdrawn, paid in full." Samuel had never withdrawn his claim. Cole knew that for certain, because they'd celebrated together the day the grant was approved. 20 acres of good bottomland where Silver Ridge Creek widened into a meadow. Samuel had plans for a cabin, a barn, maybe even a few dairy cows. Cole had looked deeper, found more names, more fraudulent notations. The pattern became clear. Someone was systematically stealing land grants meant for veterans, using forged documents and bribed officials to transfer ownership before the soldiers even knew what had happened. It took him 2 weeks to trace the scheme back to its source. Marcus Chambers, the wealthiest rancher in Silver Ridge Valley, a man who'd made his fortune in cattle and somehow emerged from the war years even richer than before. A man who'd married into one of the oldest families in the territory, giving him connections and respectability that made him nearly untouchable. Cole had confronted Marcus in his study, in the ranch house that would one day burn. He'd laid out the evidence, copies of documents he'd carefully made, testimonies he'd gathered from confused veterans. He'd expected Marcus to bluster, to deny, maybe even to offer some explanation that would make the theft seem less monstrous. Instead, Marcus had smiled, offered him whiskey, sat back in his leather chair and said, "You're smarter than you look, Captain. I respect that, so let me be direct. You can make this very difficult for everyone, including yourself, or you can be reasonable." The offer had been simple: partnership, a cut of the profits. A chance to be part of something bigger than giving charity land to broken soldiers who'd probably drink themselves to death anyway. Marcus had made it sound almost reasonable, almost patriotic. He'd spoken about building the valley into something prosperous, about how the land would be wasted in the hands of men who didn't know how to work it properly. Cole had refused. Of course he'd refused, but then Marcus had changed tactics. The smile had disappeared, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. He'd produced another ledger, one containing records of supplies Cole's unit had requisitioned during the war. Supplies that hadn't always been properly documented. Horses that had died but remained on the rolls for weeks. Equipment that had gone missing, nothing serious. Nothing that hadn't happened in every unit during the chaos of war. But enough, if presented to the right people in the right way, to raise questions about Cole's honor. Enough to taint his reputation, maybe even lead to a court-martial. "You have a choice," Marcus had said. "Walk away from this. Go back to whatever life you're planning. Keep your honor and your precious reputation. Or push forward, and I'll make sure everyone knows Captain Cole Tanner wasn't quite the hero they think he is. Your men, those veterans you're so worried about, they'll learn their beloved captain was skimming supplies and lining his own pockets while they bled." Cole had stood in that study, hands clenched, knowing he could kill Marcus Chambers right then, knowing he could probably even make it look like self-defense. But he'd also known that wouldn't solve anything. The corruption would continue. The veterans would still lose their land. And he'd be hanged for murder or spend the rest of his life running, so he'd made a different choice. He'd taken his evidence and walked away, climbed up into these mountains and built a cabin, and tried to convince himself that sometimes the cost of fighting was too high, that a man had to know when to fold his hand and accept that the world wasn't fair and never would be. For 8 years, he'd almost believed it. Almost convinced himself that he'd made the wise choice, the mature choice. That real courage meant knowing when to withdraw from a battle you couldn't win. But then, 2 weeks ago, a hunter had passed by his cabin. A grizzled old trapper named Milligan, who came through the high country twice a year, checking his trap lines. They'd shared coffee and conversation, and Milligan had mentioned news from the valley below. More evictions, more veterans losing their land. Samuel Pritchard's name had come up, still hanging on somehow, but facing foreclosure. The Chambers Ranch, now run by Marcus's widow after his death the previous winter, was expanding, buying up small farms, consolidating holdings, pushing people out. The war, Milligan had said, was still taking casualties. just slower now, quieter. That night Cole had pulled the cavalry jacket from its peg, had stood holding it in the firelight, feeling the weight of it, remembering what it meant to wear that uniform. He'd made a vow when he accepted his commission, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That vow hadn't come with an expiration date. The next morning, he'd begun the journey down from his mountain. Had packed carefully, his evidence ledger wrapped in oilcloth, a few changes of clothes, his service revolver. The ride down had taken most of 2 days, following game trails and old logging roads that led gradually back to the valley floor. Silver Ridge had changed in 8 years. New buildings on the main street, a proper hotel where there'd once been just a boarding house. The saloon had been rebuilt, larger and fancier, but the bones of the town were the same. Morrison's general store still anchored the north end of the street. The church still sat on its small hill, white paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. The sheriff's office occupied the same squat building it always had. He'd ridden in slowly, conscious of the stairs. People didn't recognize him at first. He'd grown a beard. His hair had gone grey at the temples, and 8 years of mountain life had weathered him like old wood. He looked like what he'd become, a man who lived rough and alone, more comfortable with silence than conversation. He'd tied his horse outside Morrison's store, had climbed the 3 steps to the porch, had pushed through the door into the familiar smell of coffee and leather and pickle brine. Tom Morrison, older and greyer but still recognizable, had looked up from behind the counter. "Help you?" Morrison had asked, his tone professionally friendly but cautious. Storekeepers in frontier towns learned early to be wary of strangers. "Need some supplies," Cole had said. "Flour, coffee, dried beans. And I'm looking for work if you know of any." Morrison had started pulling items from the shelves. "Work's scarce right now. Harvest is mostly done. What kind of work you looking for?" "Anything honest. I can handle horses, mend fence, chop wood. Did some blacksmithing during the war." "The war?" Morrison had paused, studying him more carefully. "Which side?" "Union, cavalry." Something had shifted in Morrison's expression, respect maybe, or just the recognition that they'd shared something, even if they'd never met in those days. "Well, I'll ask around. Can't promise anything. Times are—" The door had opened behind Cole. He'd heard the rustle of expensive fabric, smelled perfume that didn't belong in a general store, heard the sharp click of fine boots on wooden planks, and then a woman's voice, clear and cold and used to being obeyed. "Mr. Morrison, I need those supplies loaded into my carriage immediately. I don't have time to wait while you chat with every drifter who wanders through." Cole had turned slowly, had seen her for the first time. Evelyn Chambers, though he didn't know her name yet. She'd been dressed in black silk, still in mourning for Marcus, her dark hair pulled back severely, her face beautiful in a sharp, unforgiving way. Behind her had stood a large man with a scarred face and hard eyes, wearing a foreman's vest and carrying himself like a man who knew how to use the gun on his hip. That was how it had begun, with judgment and contempt and words that cut deeper than any saber, with his sleeve catching and tearing, with the moment when everything he'd tried to leave behind came flooding back, dragging him into a fight he'd spent 8 years avoiding. Cole had thought he'd left his past buried on this mountain, but standing in that store, watching recognition dawn in old Samuel Pritchard's eyes as the scar was revealed, he'd understood something fundamental. The past doesn't stay buried, not when there are debts still owed, not when good men are still suffering, not when the fight you walked away from is still being lost. Some ghosts don't haunt you. Some ghosts are just truths you haven't faced yet. And Cole Tanner's 8 years of peace were about to end, because he'd finally learned the difference. The inside of Morrison's general store smelled like every frontier mercantile Cole had ever entered: wood smoke, coffee beans, cured leather, and the faint sweetness of dried apples in barrels. Sunlight slanted through the front windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the still air. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like standing on a battlefield just before the first shot. Evelyn Chambers swept past Cole as if he were furniture, her black silk dress rustling with each precise step. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been made to wait, never had to consider that her comfort might inconvenience others. The large man behind her, Dutch Keller, though Cole didn't know the name yet, positioned himself near the door with the casual alertness of someone paid to watch for trouble. "Mrs. Chambers," Morrison said, his voice taking on a different quality. "Not quite servile, but definitely careful. I'll have everything ready shortly." "I was just helping this gentleman. I can see what you were doing," Evelyn interrupted. She didn't even glance at Cole. "What I need is for you to prioritize customers who actually contribute to this town's prosperity. My order was supposed to be ready an hour ago." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I apologize. If you'll just give me a moment—" "I've given you several moments already." Evelyn moved to the counter, pulling a list from her handbag. "I need these items today, not tomorrow, not next week. My household can't function when deliveries are delayed." Cole had dealt with plenty of difficult people in his life. Officers who abused their rank. Politicians who treated soldiers like chess pieces. Civilians who thought wartime sacrifices applied to everyone except themselves. He'd learned to keep his mouth shut, do his duty, and move on. That's what he intended to do now. Step aside. Let Morrison handle his business. Wait his turn like a civilized man. But then Evelyn's eyes landed on him, really seeing him for the first time. Her gaze traveled from his scuffed boots to his worn canvas pants to his faded shirt with the torn sleeve he'd been meaning to mend for weeks. Her lip curled slightly, the kind of expression someone makes when they've discovered something unpleasant on the bottom of their shoe. "Mr. Morrison," she said, not looking away from Cole, "since when do we allow mountain trash to loiter in respectable establishments?" The store went quiet. Two other customers, a farmer in overalls and an older woman with a basket, stopped their browsing. Morrison froze behind the counter. Even Keller shifted his weight, sensing the sudden tension. Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, exactly, more like resignation. He'd known this would be hard. Knew he'd changed in 8 years. Knew people would see him as just another drifter. But there was a difference between being overlooked and being dismissed. Between being poor and being called trash. "Ma'am," Cole said quietly, "I'm just here for supplies." "I'll wait my turn." "Your turn?" Evelyn's voice rose slightly, gaining an edge. "Your turn comes after paying customers, after people who belong in this town. I don't know what rock you crawled out from under, but we have standards here in Silver Ridge." "Evelyn, Mrs. Chambers," Morrison interjected, clearly uncomfortable. "The gentleman hasn't caused any trouble. He's just what? Just another vagrant looking for handouts? Just another man with no breeding and no prospects who thinks he can wander into our town and expect charity." She turned fully toward Cole now, her dark eyes flashing. "We built this valley. People like my late husband, God rest his soul, turned this wilderness into civilization. And we didn't do it by coddling every saddle tramp who rides through looking for easy money." Cole's hands, resting loosely at his sides, clenched briefly, then relaxed. He'd commanded men through artillery fire with less effort than it took to keep his voice level. "I'm not looking for charity, ma'am. I'm looking to pay for goods and earn honest work. That's all. Honest work." Evelyn laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Look at you. You can barely keep your clothes mended. What kind of honest work could someone like you possibly do? You probably can't even read. I can read just fine. Can you?" She stepped closer, close enough that Cole could smell her perfume, something expensive with roses in it. "Tell me then, can you read the signs that make it clear your kind isn't welcome here? Can you understand, when someone of quality is speaking to you, that you should remove yourself from their presence?" Morrison came around the counter, his face flushed. "Now that's enough, Mrs. Chambers. I won't have you talking to people like that in my store. War's been over for years. Every man deserves basic respect. Basic respect is earned, Mr. Morrison, not handed out like penny candy." Evelyn's voice had gone ice cold. "And I'll thank you to remember who keeps this store profitable. The Chambers Ranch accounts for 1/3 of your business. I'd hate to think you'd jeopardize that relationship over some drifter with no future." The threat hung in the air, naked and ugly. Morrison's face went through several emotions: anger, fear, calculation. Cole could see him doing the mathematics, weighing principle against survival. It was a calculation Cole himself had made 8 years ago, and he couldn't blame the man for whatever choice he made. "It's fine," Cole said, turning toward the door. "I'll come back another time." But Evelyn wasn't finished. Maybe she sensed weakness, or maybe cruelty was just her nature. She reached out as Cole moved past her, not quite touching him, but making a dismissive gesture that brought her hand close to his torn sleeve. "Yes, run along. Back to whatever hole you—" Her brooch, an ornate silver piece pinned to her collar, caught the frayed edge of Cole's sleeve as he tried to move past. The fabric, already weak, tore further with a soft ripping sound. The sleeve pulled away from his shoulder, exposing his upper arm, exposing the scar. It ran from just below his shoulder to halfway down his bicep. A jagged line of puckered white tissue against his sun-browned skin. The kind of scar that came from a blade, not a bullet. Deep enough to have severed muscle, close enough to the bone that he'd spent months learning to use his arm again. The kind of scar a man carried forever, a permanent record of a moment when death had come close and been turned away by luck and will. Evelyn stepped back, her eyes fixed on the mark. The color drained from her face. "Lord above," someone whispered. Cole looked toward the voice. An old man stood in the corner near the cracker barrel, someone who'd been so still and quiet that Cole hadn't noticed him. He was perhaps 70, thin and weathered, with white hair and pale blue eyes that were wide with shock. "Captain," the old man said. His voice trembled. "Captain Tanner?" The name fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Morrison's mouth opened. The farmer and the older woman both turned, staring. Even Keller straightened, his hand moving unconsciously toward his gun. Cole met the old man's eyes and saw recognition there. Saw memory. Saw someone who'd been present for the moment when this scar was made. "Hello, Samuel," Cole said quietly. Samuel Pritchard, because that's who it was. Though 8 years had aged him considerably, stepped forward with the slow, deliberate movements of a man whose body had been broken and poorly mended. He walked with a cane, Cole noticed. His left leg dragged slightly. "It is you," Samuel breathed. "Sweet mercy, we thought you were dead. Everyone said after you disappeared, we thought." His eyes filled with tears. "Captain, where have you been?" "In the mountains." Cole's throat felt tight. He'd known he might encounter men he'd served with, but he hadn't prepared for this, for the raw emotion, the confusion, the questions he didn't want to answer. But why? Samuel limped closer, close enough to touch Cole's arm, to trace the scar with shaking fingers. "You were a hero. You saved us. You saved me." He turned to address the store at large, his voice gaining strength. "This is Captain Cole Tanner. He commanded the cavalry unit that defended Silver Ridge Valley during the war. When Confederate raiders came through, Captain Marlowe's men, they were burning farms, killing anyone who resisted. We'd have all been slaughtered if not for him. Samuel—" Cole tried to interrupt, but the old soldier wasn't finished. "I was pinned under my horse when it was shot out from under me. Confederate officer came at me with his saber, would have taken my head off. The captain rode between us. Took the blow meant for me." Samuel's voice cracked. "That scar, that's from saving my life. He killed the Confederate, pulled me out, got me to safety. Him and his men held that line for 6 hours while the civilians evacuated." Morrison was staring at Cole with new eyes. So was everyone else in the store. The farmer had removed his hat. The older woman had her hand over her mouth. Evelyn Chambers looked like she'd been struck. All the color had drained from her face. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "No words came out. We gave you a medal," Samuel continued. "The town held a ceremony. You were there, Mrs. Chambers. You were just a girl then, but you were there. Don't you remember? Your father presented the citation. We all thought, when you disappeared a few months later, we thought maybe you'd died. Some said you'd gone back east. Others said you'd been killed by outlaws on the road. Nobody knew." His hand was still on Cole's arm, gripping tight as if afraid Cole might vanish again. "Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you let us know you were alive?" Cole looked around the store, at Samuel's desperate confusion, at Morrison's dawning comprehension. At the other customer's mixture of shock and curiosity. At Dutch Keller, whose expression had gone carefully neutral in a way that made Cole's instincts prickle. And at Evelyn Chambers, who was staring at him like he was a ghost risen from a grave she'd thought was sealed forever. I had my reasons, Cole said finally. He gently removed Samuel's hand from his arm. Sometimes a man needs to step away from his past. Start fresh somewhere else. But these people needed you, Samuel said. The veterans. We've been struggling. Land grants that were supposed to be ours. He stopped abruptly, his eyes flicking toward Evelyn, then back to Cole. There's been trouble. I know, Cole said. That's why I came back. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Evelyn found her voice, though it came out smaller than before, uncertain. Captain Tanner, she said. I apologize. I didn't recognize... No reason you should, ma'am. I've changed. It's been a long time. Cole's voice was even, without rancor. And your words weren't wrong. I'm just a drifter now. The uniform's gone. The rank doesn't mean anything anymore. I'm just a man looking for supplies and work, but you're not just... She stopped, seeming to struggle with something. My father spoke of you. He said you were the bravest man he'd ever met. He said, another pause. He died last year. He would have wanted to know you survived. Cole nodded slowly. I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry about your husband as well. Marcus Chambers, wasn't it? At the name, something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Something Cole couldn't quite read. Grief, certainly, but something else underneath it. Discomfort, maybe. Or fear, yes, she said quietly. He passed last winter. Fever took him. My condolences. Cole meant it. Whatever Marcus Chambers had done, death was death. He built quite a legacy. The ranch has grown considerably from what I remember. He was a brilliant man, ambitious. He saw potential where others saw only wilderness. Evelyn's voice had regained some of its earlier strength, pride warming her words. Everything he touched prospered. I'm sure that's true, Cole said. And then, because he couldn't help himself, because 8 years of silence had left him with too many words unsaid, I hope that prosperity was earned fairly. I hope the land he acquired came through honest means. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you implying, Captain? Nothing, ma'am. Just that sometimes, in the rush to build empires, people forget where the boundaries are. Forget that some land belongs to others by right. Cole picked up his torn sleeve, examining it. Seems like things can tear awful easy when you're not careful. Good fabric gets damaged. Things that should stay covered get exposed. Samuel was looking between them, confusion evident on his weathered face. Morrison had gone very still. Keller's hand rested on his gun belt now, not threatening, but ready. Evelyn drew herself up to her full height. The moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the steel Cole had seen when she first entered the store. My husband, she said precisely, was a man of impeccable character. Everything he built was built legally and properly. If you're suggesting otherwise, captain or no captain, war hero or no war hero, you'll find yourself facing serious consequences. I'm not suggesting anything, Cole said mildly. Just making conversation. Just saying that sometimes things aren't what they appear. Sometimes the prettiest buildings are built on rotten foundations. He turned to Morrison. I'll come back for those supplies later, when it's more convenient. He walked toward the door. Keller didn't move aside immediately, forcing Cole to stop inches from the larger man. They stood like that for a long moment, two men sizing each other up in the way that soldiers do, recognizing in each other the capacity for violence, the willingness to use it. Then Keller stepped aside. Just enough, just barely. Cole pushed through the door and out into the afternoon sunlight. Behind him he heard Evelyn's voice, sharp with command. Dutch, find out everything you can about him. Where he's staying, why he's really here, everything. Cole untied his horse and swung into the saddle. His hands were steady, but his heart was hammering. The confrontation had gone differently than he'd expected. He'd planned to ease back into town quietly, to gather information before revealing himself. Instead, he'd been exposed within an hour of arrival, forced into the open before he was ready, but maybe that was better. Maybe hiding was what had caused so much trouble in the first place. Samuel Pritchard emerged from the store, moving as quickly as his bad leg would allow. "Captain, wait!" Cole reined in his horse. "Samuel, are you really here to help? With the land troubles?" "Yes," relief washed over the old soldier's face. Thank God, thank God. We all thought we were alone in this. That nobody cared." Tears ran down his weathered cheeks. "They're taking my farm, Captain. Eviction notice came last week. Her men, Mrs. Chambers' men, they say my land was never properly granted. Say the paperwork was filed wrong. But I know that's not true. I know it." Cole looked down at the man who'd fought beside him, who'd trusted him, who'd nearly died under his command. "I know it's not true either, Samuel. That's why I'm here. To make things right. Can you? Can you really?" "I don't know yet. But I'm going to try." Cole leaned down, his voice dropping. "Samuel, I need you to trust me a little longer. Don't do anything yet. Don't confront anyone. Don't try to fight the eviction on your own. Can you give me a few days?" Samuel nodded, wiping his eyes. "I've waited 8 years, Captain. I can wait a few more days. Just don't disappear again, please. We need you." Cole's throat tightened. Those were the words he'd been running from. The ones that had chased him up the mountain and haunted his nights. "We need you. I won't disappear," he promised. "Not this time." He rode away down the dusty street, feeling the weight of eyes on his back. The secret was out. Cole Tanner had returned. And in returning, he'd drawn a line in the dirt that someone would have to cross. In the store behind him, Evelyn Chambers stood at the window watching him go, her hand pressed against the glass. Her reflection showed a woman who'd just had her world tilted on its axis, who'd seen something she'd thought buried rise up to challenge everything she believed, and in the shadows near the back of the store. Dutch Keller watched too, his scarred face unreadable, his mind already working through the implications of this unexpected development. The mountain man had come down from his exile. The hero had returned from the dead, and Silver Ridge Valley, which had enjoyed 8 years of quiet prosperity built on stolen ground, was about to learn that some debts can never be outrun, and some truths can never stay buried forever. The Pritchard farm sat 3 miles east of Silver Ridge, tucked into a fold of land where Silver Ridge Creek widened into a gentle meadow. It was exactly the kind of place a soldier might dream about during long marches and cold nights. 20 acres of good bottomland, a small cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that had seen better days, and a view of the mountains that reminded a man why he'd fought in the first place. Cole rode up the narrow track in mid-morning, the autumn sun warm on his shoulders. He could see Samuel in the distance, working his small garden plot with the slow, determined movements of a man whose body had been broken, but whose spirit refused to quit. A boy, maybe 12 years old, was helping him, pulling weeds and stacking them in a pile. Samuel straightened as Cole approached, one hand going to his lower back. His face split into a smile that took years off his weathered features. "Captain, I didn't expect to see you so soon," he called to the boy. "Michael, come meet someone. This is Captain Tanner, the man I told you about." The boy approached cautiously, all gangly limbs and serious dark eyes. He had Samuel's bone structure, but smoother, younger features. Cole could see intelligence in those eyes and wariness, the look of a child who'd learned early that the world could be harsh. "Pleased to meet you." "Sir," Michael said, offering his hand with formal politeness. Cole shook it. "Your grandfather speaks highly of you, Michael. He speaks highly of you too, sir. Says you saved his life in the war. We saved each other. That's how it works in battle." Samuel gestured toward the cabin. Come in, come in. We've got coffee, and Martha Hayes sent over some of her apple cake yesterday. Michael, would you put the tools away and fetch some water from the well?" "Yes, sir." The boy headed toward the barn, casting curious glances back at Cole. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A table, 2 chairs, a bed in one corner, and a smaller cot in another. Shelves held a few dishes, some canned goods, a Bible. Hanging on the wall was a faded photograph in a simple frame. A young couple on their wedding day, the man in uniform, the woman in a simple dress. Samuel's son and daughter-in-law, Cole guessed. Michael's parents. Samuel poured coffee from a pot on the stove. His hands shook slightly. Lost my son 4 years ago. Mining accident over in Copper Creek. His wife had died giving birth to Michael. So it's just the boy and me now. I'm sorry, don't be. We've had good years together. He's a fine boy, smart, hard-working. He'll make something of himself. Samuel's voice dropped. If we can keep this place, if I can give him something to build on. They sat at the table. Cole sipped the coffee, weak but hot, and waited for Samuel to continue. The eviction notice came 2 weeks ago. Samuel pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket, the creases deep from repeated handling. Says my claim was never properly recorded. Says the land belongs to the Chambers estate by right of prior purchase. But, Captain, I've got my land grant papers. I've got the deed. Everything was done proper. Cole unfolded the notice. It was signed by Dutch Keller, acting as agent for the Chambers estate. The language was legal but clear. Samuel had 30 days to vacate the property or face forcible removal. May I see your grant papers? Samuel retrieved a battered tin box from under his bed. Inside were carefully preserved documents. His land grant, signed by a federal land office official. The deed, dated and notarized. A map showing the property boundaries. Letters from the land office confirming his claim. Cole examined them closely. The papers were legitimate. More than that, they showed signs of having been properly filed. Stamps, registration numbers, official seals. There was no way these were forgeries. These are good documents, Samuel. Legal and binding. Then how can they take my land? Cole pulled out his own ledger. Because 8 years ago, Marcus Chambers bribed a land office clerk named Hodges to create false records showing your claim was withdrawn. Look here, he pointed to an entry. $500 paid to Hodges. The date matches when your grant should have been finalized. What Marcus did was create a paper trail that makes it look like you gave up your claim voluntarily. Then he purchased the land through a straw buyer. Samuel's face went pale. But I never withdrew anything. I never even talked to anyone about selling. I know. That's the fraud. Marcus created documents that don't match reality. The problem is, his false documents are in the official records. Your real documents are here with you. In court it becomes your word against the government files. So I lose. Even though I'm right? Not necessarily. If we can prove the fraud, show that Hodges was bribed, that the records were altered, we can challenge the eviction. But it'll take time, and it'll require evidence beyond this ledger. Michael appeared in the doorway with a bucket of water. He set it down carefully, then stood there, clearly wanting to stay, but uncertain if he should. It's all right, boy, Samuel said. This concerns you too. Gumzit. Michael sat on the floor near his grandfather's chair. Cole noticed the boy's hands, calloused and rough for someone so young. Working hands. The hands of someone who'd been doing a man's labor before he was ready. How long do we have? Samuel asked. 18 days before the eviction date. But I'm going to try to get an injunction, a legal order stopping the eviction until we can have a proper hearing. Will that work? I don't know. The nearest judge is in Copper Creek, 2 days' ride. I'll need to present evidence, make a case. It's not guaranteed. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his coffee cooling in his hands. Captain, I need to tell you something. 2 nights ago, some men came by, 3 of them wearing masks. They said if I didn't leave voluntarily, things would get difficult. They didn't say what that meant, but he glanced at Michael. I'm not worried about myself. I'm old. I've lived my life. But the boy, I understand. Cole kept his voice calm, though anger burned in his chest. Has Sheriff Dalton been informed? I told him. He said he'd patrol more regularly, but he's just one man. Samuel's hand found Michael's shoulder, gripped it protectively. I've been thinking maybe I should just go. Take what little money I have, find somewhere else to start over. It's not worth Michael getting hurt. Grandpa, no! Michael's voice was fierce. This is our home. You fought for this land. We can't just let them take it. Sometimes, boy, you have to choose between being right and being safe. Is that what Captain Tanner did? Just gave up when things got hard? The words hung in the air. Samuel winced. Michael, that's not... It's a fair question, Cole interrupted. He looked at the boy, at the anger and fear and desperate hope fighting in those young eyes. No, Michael, it's not what I did. What I did was worse. I ran away when things got hard. I told myself I had good reasons, but the truth is, I was scared and tired, and I took the easy way out. And for 8 years I've regretted it. That's why I'm here now, to try to make up for that mistake. So you're going to help us? Really help us? I'm going to try, but I need you both to understand something. This is going to get harder before it gets better. The men who want this land aren't going to just give up because I ask nicely. There might be more threats. There might be violence. And I can't promise I'll be able to stop all of it. Michael looked at his grandfather. We stay. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. Boy, we stay. You always told me a man doesn't run from his responsibilities. That honor matters more than comfort. Isn't that what you said? Samuel nodded slowly. That's what I said. And I meant it. He looked at Cole. We stay. Whatever comes, we face it here. Cole felt the weight of that decision, the trust being placed in him. These two people, an old soldier and a young boy, were betting their future on his ability to deliver justice. It was the same weight he'd felt during the war, when men followed his orders into battle, trusting he'd lead them through. All right then. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to keep everything as normal as possible. Work the farm. Go about your business. Don't confront anyone. Don't give them an excuse to escalate. I'm going to work on the legal side. File the injunction, gather more evidence, talk to other veterans. Sheriff Dalton is on our side, quietly. We're going to build a case that can't be ignored. And if the legal way doesn't work, Samuel asked quietly. Cole met his eyes. Then we'll deal with that when we come to it. But let's try peace first. Justice first. That's what we fought for, isn't it? The rule of law. The idea that might doesn't make right, yes, sir. That's what we fought for. As Cole prepared to leave, Michael walked him to his horse. The boy's face was set in determined lines that made him look older than his years. Mr. Tanner, I know Grandpa says violence is wrong, but if they come for us, if they try to hurt him, I won't just stand there. I'll fight back. Cole rested his hand on the boy's shoulder. I know you would. And if it comes to that, you do what you need to do to protect your grandfather. But son, I've seen enough fighting for 2 lifetimes. It always costs more than you think. So let's do everything we can to make sure it doesn't come to that. Yes, sir. Cole rode away from the Pritchard farm with a heavy heart. Behind him, Samuel and Michael stood watching, an old man and a boy, holding onto a small piece of land that represented everything they had. Everything they were. The stakes had never been clearer. This wasn't about abstract justice anymore. It was about keeping a roof over that boy's head, about honoring the promise made to a soldier who'd given his body to his country, about proving that sometimes, late though it might be, the right thing still mattered. Cole thought about his cabin in the mountains, about how easy it would be to ride back up there, leave this mess behind again. But then he thought about Michael's face, about the fierce determination to hold on to home, about what it would teach that boy if the adults in his life gave up without a fight. No, he'd made his choice. For better or worse, he was in this until the end. Evelyn stood in Marcus's study long after Captain Tanner had ridden away. The papers he'd given her lay on the desk where she'd dropped them. Columns of numbers and names that threatened to unravel everything she'd believed about her marriage. Her life, her very identity. She'd been 19 when she married Marcus Chambers. He'd been 35, already wealthy, already powerful. Her father had encouraged the match, called it a strategic alliance between old family and new money. She'd been dazzled by Marcus's confidence, his vision for building something grand in this wild valley. He'd promised her a life of comfort and purpose. He'd delivered both. What he hadn't delivered was honesty. Evelyn lit the lamp on the desk as evening shadows filled the room. She'd avoided this space since Marcus's death, unable to face the emptiness where his presence had been. Now she forced herself to sit in his chair, to open his drawers, to rifle through papers she'd never been allowed to see during his lifetime. "Business matters, my dear," he'd always said. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with." She'd accepted that, had been grateful even, to be spared the tedious details of ranch management. She'd focused instead on her role, managing the household, organizing charity events, representing the Chamber's name in society. She'd thought herself a partner in building his legacy. Now she wondered if she'd just been a useful decoration. The desk had 4 drawers. The top 3 held ordinary correspondence, letters from business associates, contracts for cattle sales, receipts for equipment. The bottom drawer was locked. Evelyn searched for a key, checking the obvious places, the pencil tray under the blotter, in the small box where Marcus kept spare buttons and collar stays. Nothing. She stood and surveyed the study, trying to think like Marcus. Where would he hide something important? The bookshelf seemed too obvious. The safe behind the painting. She knew the combination, but also knew it held only cash and their important papers, property deeds, her jewelry, his will. Her eyes fell on Marcus's favorite books, a matched set of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. He'd read those volumes obsessively, claimed they held lessons about power and civilization. She pulled out the 3rd volume and opened it. The center had been hollowed out. Inside lay a small brass key. Her hands shook as she unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside were bundled letters, a second ledger, and a leather folder tied with string. She pulled everything out and spread it across the desk. The letters were correspondence between Marcus and someone named Hodges, the same name from Tanner's papers. The earliest dated from 2 years after the war's end. The language was cautious, circuitous, but the meaning became clear as she read. Hodges had access to land office records. Marcus had money and ambition. Together, they'd found a way to profit from veterans too unsophisticated to protect their claims. One letter made her stomach turn. The Pritchard grant will be particularly easy. The old soldier can barely read. He'll never understand the paperwork was altered. By the time he realizes his claim has been withdrawn, we'll have clear title. Samuel Pritchard, the man who'd recognized Captain Tanner in the store. The man whose face had shown such joy at seeing his old commander. Marcus had stolen from him deliberately, callously, knowing exactly what he was taking. The ledger was more detailed than Tanner's copies. It showed not just the bribes paid, but the properties acquired, the resale values, the profits. Over 8 years, Marcus had accumulated nearly 600 acres of veteran land grants. The total profit exceeded $50,000. Evelyn's vision blurred with tears. $50,000. More than enough to account for their comfortable life, the improvements to the ranch, her jewelry, the imported furniture. Everything she'd touched, everything she'd enjoyed, had been purchased with stolen valor. The leather folder was last. She untied it with trembling fingers and found herself looking at a photograph, faded but clear. 5 men in Confederate cavalry uniforms, standing beside their horses. She recognized Marcus immediately, young and smiling. Next to him stood Dutch Keller, unmistakable even 20 years younger. Behind the photograph was a letter, dated 3 months after the war's end. Marcus had written it to someone named Wade Marlowe. The Yankees took everything from us, our cause, our honor, our very way of life. But they haven't taken our will to fight back. I'm heading west to start fresh. The Union promised land to their soldiers. I'll make sure they never enjoy it. Every acre I take is 1 less acre in enemy hands. Come join me when you can. We'll continue the fight in ways they'll never see coming. Evelyn's breath caught. This wasn't just fraud. This was war, a secret, bitter campaign of revenge that Marcus had waged for years after the official fighting ended. He'd come to Silver Ridge not to build, but to destroy. Every veteran he'd cheated, every family he'd displaced, had been an enemy in his continuing conflict, and she'd never known, had never suspected. Had lived in comfort built on calculated malice. A knock on the study door made her jump. "Ma'am?" Keller's voice, gruff but concerned. "You've been in there for hours. Is everything all right?" She quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into the desk drawer. "I'm fine, Mr. Keller, just going through some of Marcus's things. Did Tanner upset you? Because if he did, no, he was honest with me. More honest than I deserved." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Mr. Keller, I need to ask you something. Did you know Marcus during the war?" Silence from the other side of the door. "Then yes, ma'am. We served together in Captain Marlowe's unit." Another pause, longer this time. "Yes? And when you came here to work for Marcus, was that because of old loyalties from the war?" Mrs. Chambers, I don't think... Please, I need to understand. She opened the door. Keller stood in the hallway, his expression guarded. What exactly have you been doing in Marcus's name? The evictions, the pressure on veterans, is that your initiative, or are you continuing something Marcus started? Keller's jaw tightened. Your husband was a great man. He understood that the war didn't really end, it just changed form. Those Yankees thought they won, thought they could dictate terms. We showed them different. We. Evelyn's voice rose. Mr. Keller, the war ended 16 years ago. Those veterans you're evicting fought for their country. They fought for the wrong country. Keller's facade of respect cracked, showing the hard soldier beneath. They invaded our homeland, burned our cities, destroyed our way of life. Marcus understood justice. Real justice. Every acre we took was payment for what they took from us. That's not justice. That's revenge. Call it what you want. Marcus built this ranch as a monument to Southern resilience. I'm not going to let some Yankee captain tear that down. Evelyn stepped back, seeing Keller clearly for the first time. Not a loyal foreman, a true believer in a cause that should have died with the Confederacy. You need to stop the evictions. All of them, immediately. I don't take orders from you, ma'am. I own this ranch. Marcus left it to me. That makes me your employer, Keller smiled, a cold expression without warmth. With respect, Mrs. Chambers, you own a piece of paper. I run the ranch. The men follow me, not you. And I'm not stopping anything. In fact, I'm accelerating. Pritchard gets evicted in 2 weeks. The Chen property comes next. By year's end, we'll have cleared every veteran from land that rightfully belongs to whom? To the Confederacy. Mr. Keller, the Confederacy lost. It's gone. Whatever war you're fighting, it's over. It's not over until I say it's over. He turned to leave, then paused. You should understand something, ma'am. Marcus protected you because you were useful, a respectable face on dirty work. Don't make yourself useless by getting in the way. I'd hate to see you lose everything because you chose the wrong side. He walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden floors. Evelyn stood frozen, the threat implicit in his words. She'd thought herself in control, thought she could simply order things made right. Instead, she'd discovered she had no real power. The ranch, the men, the operations, Keller controlled it all. She was just the owner in name. She returned to the study and barricaded the door. Then, working by lamplight, she carefully copied the most damaging documents. If Keller decided to destroy evidence, she'd have her own records. If he decided to silence her, she pushed that thought away. She needed to get these copies to Captain Tanner, needed to warn him that Keller was planning to escalate. Near midnight, she finished. She sealed the copies in an envelope and addressed it to Cole Tanner at the boarding house. Tomorrow, she'd find a way to deliver it. Tonight, she'd sleep in the study with the door locked, no longer certain she was safe in her own home. Outside, in the bunkhouse, Keller gathered his most trusted men. The widow's becoming a problem, he told them. She's been talking to Tanner, going through Marcus's papers. We need to send a clear message to her and to anyone thinking about opposing us. What kind of message? Jake Mercer asked. Keller smiled. The Pritchard farm. Tonight, burn the barn. Nothing that'll kill them. I'm not a murderer. Just enough to show we're serious. Make the old man understand he needs to leave. Later that night, flames lit the sky over the Pritchard property. Samuel and Michael escaped with their lives, but watched helplessly as their barn and their winter hay burned to ashes. When Sheriff Dalton arrived at dawn, he found them sitting in the dirt, covered in soot. Michael crying against his grandfather's shoulder, and in the boarding house, Cole Tanner woke to someone pounding on his door with news that would change everything. The ride to the Pritchard farm took Cole 20 minutes through pre-dawn darkness, his horse breathing hard from the pace. Sheriff Dalton had come to the boarding house himself, his face grim in the lamplight, to deliver the news. Fire. Barn destroyed. Samuel and Michael safe but shaken. Evidence of arson. Torches found. Accelerant smell in the air. Cole's hands had clenched on his reins the entire ride, anger and guilt warring in his chest. He'd known Keller would escalate. Should have anticipated it. Should have taken measures to protect Samuel. Should have. The refrain of every commander who's lost men to decisions made too slowly or too cautiously. Dawn was breaking as he arrived. The barn was a smoking ruin, blackened timber frames still standing like the ribs of some great beast. The smell of burned hay and wood hung thick in the air. Samuel sat on the cabin steps, a blanket around his shoulders, Michael pressed against his side. Deputy Clayton Reed stood nearby, young face set in angry lines, taking notes. Cole dismounted and approached slowly. Samuel looked up and Cole saw something break in the old soldier's expression, the last reserves of strength crumbling in the presence of someone he trusted. "They came around midnight," Samuel said, his voice hoarse from smoke. 3 men on horseback, wearing masks, but I recognized Keller's build, the way he sits a horse. They threw torches into the barn before I could even get my rifle. Michael and I tried to save some of it, but he gestured helplessly at the ruins. The hay was too dry, went up like powder. "Anyone hurt?" Cole asked, though he could see they weren't, just scared and tired. And Samuel's voice cracked. "Captain, that was our winter feed. All of it. I can't afford to replace it. Can't afford to feed the animals without it. They didn't just burn a barn. They took away any chance of staying." Michael's face was streaked with soot and tears. He looked at Cole with eyes too old for 12 years. "They were laughing," the boy said. While it burned, I heard them laughing. Cole felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. This was beyond business, beyond even fraud. This was cruelty for its own sake. This was men enjoying the power to destroy. "I'm taking you both back to town," Cole said. "You'll stay at Martha's boarding house until this is settled." "Can't afford," Samuel began. "I'll cover it. Don't argue. Your place isn't safe anymore, but the animals, we'll arrange for someone to come care for them." "Sheriff, can you handle that?" Dalton nodded. "Tom Morrison's son can do it. He's good with livestock." They loaded what they could salvage into Samuel's wagon, clothes, dishes, the tin box with Samuel's papers, Michael's few possessions. Samuel moved slowly, like a man in a dream, touching the walls of his cabin as if saying goodbye. Michael was quiet, helping with grim efficiency. As they prepared to leave, a rider appeared on the road from town. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the valley. Cole's hand went to his gun, but he relaxed when he recognized the horse, a fine grey mare from the Chambers stable. Evelyn Chambers rode astride, dressed in a simple riding skirt and jacket, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her face was pale but determined. She carried a leather satchel across her shoulder. "Captain Tanner," she called as she approached. Then she saw the burned barn, and her hand went to her mouth. "Oh God, oh no. Samuel, Mr. Pritchard, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't rebuild a barn," Samuel said bitterly. I know it doesn't." She dismounted, clutching the satchel. "Captain, I need to speak with you, privately. It's urgent." Cole glanced at Dalton, who nodded. "I'll get Samuel and the boy loaded up and back to town. You two talk." Evelyn walked with Cole away from the cabin, out past the smoking barn, to where they could speak without being overheard. Her hands shook as she opened the satchel. "Last night I found these in Marcus's desk. After you left, I searched his study thoroughly. Found a hidden key, a locked drawer." She pulled out papers, letters, the photograph, the detailed ledger. "You were right. About all of it. But it's worse than you knew. So much worse." She handed him the photograph first. Cole studied it in the morning light, his blood running cold as he recognized the uniforms, the faces. Marcus Chambers, Dutch Keller, and 3 other men, one of whom, "That's Captain Wade Marlowe," Cole said quietly. "The Confederate officer who led the raid on Silver Ridge Valley during the war." "I know." "There's a letter." She rifled through the papers. "Here, Marcus wrote to Marlowe after the war. Captain, they didn't come here by accident. Marcus came to Silver Ridge specifically to continue fighting the war. The land theft wasn't about profit. It was about revenge. Every veteran he cheated was an enemy soldier in his mind. Every acre he took was a victory in a war that never ended for him." Cole read the letter, feeling pieces fall into place. Marcus's meticulous records, the deliberate targeting of veterans, the way he'd kept proof of his crimes, because to him they weren't crimes. They were campaign victories in a conflict that had merely changed tactics. "Keller was part of it from the beginning," Evelyn continued. "He confirmed it last night. Told me the war wasn't really over, that they were continuing the fight. When I tried to order him to stop the evictions, he threatened me. Said I was useful to Marcus as a respectable face, but that I shouldn't get in the way. He threatened you. Cole's voice was sharp, not physically, not directly, but the implication was clear. I have no real power. The ranch, the men, everything responds to Keller, not to me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Whether from tears or lack of sleep, Cole couldn't tell. This fire, I think it was him, sending a message to both of us. Cole looked back at the burned barn, at Samuel loading his meager possessions into the wagon, at young Michael's devastated face. The scope of what he was dealing with expanded in his mind. Not just a corrupt businessman, a Confederate soldier who'd never surrendered, who'd spent 16 years waging guerrilla warfare against men who'd worn blue uniforms. "There's more," Evelyn said. She handed him the detailed ledger, showing the full extent of Marcus's acquisitions. 23 veterans cheated. Over 600 acres stolen. But then she showed him another page, a list of names under the heading Future Actions. Samuel Pritchard's name was there. So was William Chen's, Robert Youngblood's, a dozen others. Dates were noted beside each name. Eviction dates, acquisition dates. It was a campaign plan, methodical and cold. This was written in Marcus's hand 2 months before he died, Evelyn said. But look at the most recent entries, added in different ink, different handwriting. Keller's been updating it. He's continuing the plan. Cole studied the additions. The Chen property was marked for acquisition next month. The Youngblood farm 3 months after that. Keller intended to systematically clear every Union veteran from the valley. "Why are you showing me this?" Cole asked. "You could destroy these papers. Protect your husband's reputation. Maintain your wealth, because I can't live with it." Evelyn's voice broke. "I thought I married a man of vision. Instead, I was wife to someone consumed by hatred. Every comfort I enjoyed, every pleasant day I spent in that house, was purchased with the suffering of men who'd served their country. I won't continue that, even if it costs me everything." Cole felt his assessment of her shift. She wasn't the proud, contemptuous woman from the store. She was someone confronting the collapse of her entire world and choosing integrity over comfort. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Help you. However I can. I'll testify about what I found. I'll sign affidavits. I'll return every acre Marcus stole if that's what's required." She met his eyes. "But Captain, there's something else. Keller won't stop just because we have evidence. He believes in what he's doing. Believes it with the kind of certainty that makes men dangerous. I know. I've dealt with true believers before. Then you know this won't end peacefully. He'll fight. And he has men loyal to him, not to me, not to the law, but to him personally. Men who share his beliefs about the war, about Southern honor, about the enemy that needs to be punished." Cole thought about Keller's scarred face, his military bearing, the way he'd positioned himself at the ranch gate. This was a man who'd probably been a good soldier, disciplined, capable, loyal, all qualities that made him effective. All qualities that made him dangerous when directed toward the wrong cause. "I need to see this ranch operation up close," Cole said. "Understand how many men we're dealing with. How many are true believers versus how many are just following orders for pay. I can help with that. I still have access to the household accounts, the payroll records. I can tell you who's been with Keller longest, who came from Confederate states, who might be fighting for ideology versus who's just drawing wages." Sheriff Dalton approached. Samuel and Michael loaded in the wagon. "We ready to head back to town?" "Yes," Cole said. Then to Evelyn, "Ride with us. You're not safe at the ranch anymore. Not if Keller knows you're questioning things. I can't just abandon Mrs. Chambers. He burned a barn last night as a warning. Next time it might be a house. Your house. Come to town. We'll figure out next steps from there." She looked back toward the Chambers ranch, visible in the distance, her home, her life, everything she'd known. Then she nodded. "All right, but I need to get some things first. Personal papers, clothes, and I want to pay Samuel directly for the damages. It won't rebuild his barn, but—" "Ma'am," Samuel called from the wagon. "I don't want your money! Please, let me do this one thing right. She walked to the wagon, pulling a small purse from her satchel. "This won't fix what Marcus did, but it might help you get through the winter. Please." Samuel looked at the money, then at Michael, then back at Evelyn. Finally he nodded. "Thank you, Ma'am." They rode back to Silver Ridge in a strange caravan, the old soldier and the boy in their salvaged wagon, the sheriff on his horse, the mountain man who'd come down from exile, and the wealthy widow who'd discovered her wealth was built on lies. As they traveled, Cole's mind was working through implications. This wasn't a simple land fraud case anymore. This was a secret continuation of the Civil War, fought in courtrooms and through evictions instead of on battlefields. Keller and his men were Confederate soldiers who'd never truly laid down arms. They'd just changed tactics, and that meant they couldn't be defeated through legal means alone. True believers didn't surrender because of paperwork. They surrendered when they had no other choice. Cole had hoped to solve this peacefully, had wanted to believe that justice and law would be enough. But as he looked at the burned ruins of Samuel's barn receding behind them, at young Michael's tear-stained face, at Evelyn's determined expression, he knew peace might not be possible. Some wars don't end until someone wins decisively, until one side stops fighting, until the men with guns and hatred in their hearts are faced with a choice: surrender or die. Cole had walked away from that choice 8 years ago, told himself there had to be another way. But now he understood, sometimes there isn't another way. Sometimes the only path to peace runs through conflict. Sometimes the only way to stop violence is to face it directly and say, "No more." He touched his revolver, feeling its familiar weight. He'd hoped never to draw it in anger again. But hope, he was learning, didn't matter much when faced with men who'd chosen hatred over healing. The war hadn't ended 16 years ago. It had just gone underground. And now it was about to erupt into the open in this small valley, over land and honor, and the question of what men owe to each other when the fighting finally stops. Cole Tanner had come down from his mountain to help some veterans. Instead, he'd discovered a conspiracy that reached back to the war itself. Now he had to decide, was he willing to fight one more time? Was he willing to risk everything to end what should have ended years ago? Looking at Samuel and Michael, at their losses and their courage, he knew the answer. Yes. One more fight. One last campaign. Not for glory or revenge, but for justice. For the simple principle that some debts must be paid, some wrongs must be answered, and some men, even heroes, must stand up when standing up is the hardest thing in the world. The Civil War was about to have one final battle. And this time, Cole Tanner wouldn't run. The boarding house parlor became a war room. Martha Hayes cleared her good furniture to make space for a table borrowed from the church. And on that table, Cole spread maps of the valley, property deeds, and Evelyn's documents. Sheriff Dalton stood on one side, Deputy Reed on the other. Evelyn sat near the window, having changed into borrowed clothes from Martha's closet. Samuel dozed in a chair by the fire, exhausted from the night's ordeal. Michael sat cross-legged on the floor, quiet and watchful. It was mid-morning, and sunlight streamed through lace curtains, making the scene feel oddly domestic for what amounted to a military planning session. "First priority is legal action," Dalton said. "I'll ride to Copper Creek today, present this evidence to Judge Morrison, no relation to Tom, and request an immediate injunction stopping all evictions. With what Mrs. Chambers has provided, we have solid grounds." "How long before we get a hearing?" Cole asked. 3 days minimum, maybe a week. Judge has to review the evidence, notify all parties, schedule court time. Keller won't wait a week. He'll escalate. Cole pointed to the list of targeted properties. The Chen farm is next. "That's 4 days from now, according to this schedule. Then we protect it," Deputy Reed said. His youthful face was set with determination that reminded Cole of young soldiers he'd commanded. Brave, but inexperienced. "Postguards. Make it clear we won't allow more violence. You and what army?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Keller has 12 men loyal to him. Experienced ranch hands who know how to use weapons." "You have yourself and the deputy. And me," Cole said. "And me," Samuel added from his chair, not opening his eyes. "Don't count me out yet, Captain." "And maybe 5 or 6 other veterans in the valley who can still fight if needed," Dalton added. "But Mrs. Chambers is right. We're outnumbered and outgunned if this comes to direct conflict. Cole studied the map, thinking through scenarios. Military training never really left a man. He found himself calculating fields of fire, defensive positions, supply lines, the familiar mathematics of combat. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a community with civilians, families, children. The old rules didn't quite apply. We need to split Keller's support, Cole said finally. Right now his men follow him because he represents authority. He runs the ranch, pays their wages, gives them purpose. We need to show them he's acting outside the law, against the owner's wishes. I can help with that, Evelyn said. She stood and moved to the table. I'm still the legal owner of the Chambers Ranch. Everything is in my name since Marcus died. I can issue written orders, countermanding anything Keller says. Make it clear he's acting without authority. Will your ranch hands respect that? Cole asked. Some will. The older men, the ones who knew Marcus but weren't part of his inner circle. They'll follow legal ownership over Keller's orders. She paused, thinking. There's a man named Robert Hayes, no relation to Martha, who's been foreman of the horse operation for 10 years. He's honest, fair-minded. He's from Ohio originally. I think he'll stand with us if I ask him directly. That's a start, Dalton said. Every man we can peel away from Keller weakens his position. Cole felt a stirring of hope. This was how you won battles. Not through overwhelming force, but through strategy, through undermining enemy cohesion, through giving opponents a reason to stop fighting. We need to do this publicly. Call a meeting of all ranch employees. Have Mrs. Chambers explain the situation, issue her orders, force people to choose sides in the open. That's dangerous, Dalton warned. Forces confrontation. Could trigger violence. Avoiding confrontation is what got us here, Cole said. 8 years of avoiding it. We need to face this directly, openly, with the law and truth on our side. A knock on the front door interrupted them. Martha appeared a moment later with Tom Morrison from the general store. He looked agitated, hat clutched in his hands. Sheriff Captain, words spreading through town. People are choosing sides. Some are talking about forming a citizens' committee to support the veterans. Others are saying we should leave the Chambers Ranch alone, that it's not our business. He glanced apologetically at Evelyn. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but there's concern that messing with the ranch will hurt the whole town's economy, which is exactly what Keller will be encouraging, Cole said. Fear, economic pressure, the idea that justice costs too much. The thing is, Morrison continued, he's not entirely wrong. The ranch does employ a lot of people, buys a lot of supplies. If this turns into a drawn-out legal battle or, God forbid, violence, it'll hurt everyone. You know what hurts more. Michael spoke up from his spot on the floor. Everyone turned to look at him. Having your barn burned, losing your home, watching your grandfather, a man who fought for this country, get treated like he's nothing. That hurts more than lost business. Silence filled the room. The boy's words, simple and direct, cut through the adult complications. Morrison's face flushed. You're right, son. You're absolutely right. I apologize. I've been thinking like a merchant when I should be thinking like a citizen. He turned to Cole. What do you need from the town? Witnesses. When we confront Keller, I want townspeople present. The more public this is, the harder it will be for him to use violence or intimidation. I can arrange that. There's a church meeting tonight anyway. I'll spread the word, ask people to come to the ranch tomorrow morning. Make sure they understand it could be dangerous, Dalton warned. I will, but I think you'll be surprised how many show up. People are tired of being afraid. They're tired of watching good men get pushed around. After Morrison left, Cole pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. Mrs. Chambers, I need you to draft an official order. Something I can present to Keller before we arrive with the townspeople. Give him a chance to stand down peacefully. You think he will? She asked. No, but I want the record to show we tried. While Evelyn wrote her order, Cole walked to where Samuel sat. The old soldier's eyes were open now, watching the preparations with an expression that mixed hope and wariness. You should stay here tomorrow, Cole said quietly. Rest, let us handle this. Can't do that, Captain. This is my fight. Your fight is keeping that boy safe. That's your mission now. Samuel glanced at Michael, and his expression softened. "You're right. But, Captain, if it goes bad, if Keller won't back down, don't let him win. Don't let him and his kind keep spreading their poison." "I won't. I promise you that." The afternoon passed in preparation. Dalton left for Copper Creek with evidence for the judge. Deputy Reed rode out to the Chen farm to warn them and offer protection. Martha Hayes organized food for what might be a long next day. Evelyn wrote letters to key ranch employees, explaining the situation and asking for their support. Cole sat alone for an hour, cleaning his service revolver with the careful attention of a man who'd learned that weapons maintenance could mean the difference between life and death. The motions were familiar, almost meditative, but his mind wasn't at peace. He kept seeing Michael's face, the boy's determination, his grief, his anger. Kept thinking about Samuel's destroyed barn and all the years that old soldier had struggled just to hold on to land he'd earned with blood. Kept remembering Evelyn's shock at discovering her entire life had been a lie built on stolen honor, and he kept thinking about the choice he'd made 8 years ago, walking away, telling himself there were good reasons, that some fights weren't worth having, that a man had to know when to retreat. All lies. Comfortable lies that had let him sleep at night, but had abandoned good people to suffer. He wouldn't make that mistake again. As evening fell, Cole walked to the stable where he'd boarded his horse. He needed to ride up to his cabin one more time, retrieve something he'd left behind. The journey would take most of the night, but he'd be back by dawn. Back in time for the confrontation. The mountain trail was familiar even in darkness. His horse picked its way carefully up the switchbacks while Cole let his mind wander. In some ways, these mountains had become more home than anywhere else. No complications here, no difficult choices. Just survival and solitude. But solitude wasn't living. He understood that now. Living meant connection, meant caring about others enough to risk yourself, meant standing up even when standing up was dangerous and uncertain. The cabin looked exactly as he'd left it weeks ago. Cold, dark, empty. He lit a lamp and stood in the space that had been his entire world for so long. It felt smaller now, cramped, like a prison cell he'd built for himself. He walked to the back corner and pulled the cavalry jacket from its peg, held it up in the lamplight, examining the faded blue wool, the brass buttons, the captain's insignia, the bullet hole, the dark stains, all the marks of war, of service, of a man who'd once believed in something bigger than himself. Cole put on the jacket. It fit perfectly. He'd neither gained nor lost weight in 8 years. The familiar weight of it settled on his shoulders like responsibility, like duty, like all the things he'd tried to leave behind, but which had been part of him all along. He looked at himself in the small mirror by the door. Captain Cole Tanner looked back. Not the mountain man, not the drifter, but the officer who'd led men through hell. The man who'd been trusted to make life and death decisions. The man who'd saved a valley once before. That man had work to finish. Cole extinguished the lamp and locked the cabin door. He didn't know if he'd ever return. Didn't know if tomorrow would end in peace or violence, injustice or tragedy. But he knew he'd face it as who he really was, not as who he'd been pretending to be. The ride down the mountain took hours. Dawn was breaking as he arrived back in Silver Ridge. People were already gathering in the street. Merchants, farmers, veterans, families. Word had spread. The town was mobilizing. Martha met him at the boarding house door, her eyes widening when she saw the uniform. "Captain, is everyone ready?" "Ready as we'll ever be. Mrs. Chambers has been speaking with some of the ranch hands who came to town last night. 3 of them have agreed to stand with us. Sheriff Dalton got back an hour ago. The judge approved an emergency injunction. Keller is legally required to stop all evictions immediately. That's good news. But Keller doesn't care about legal requirements. I know. That's why half the town is planning to ride out to the ranch with you." She touched his arm. "Cole, please be careful. We've lost enough already." "We can't lose you too." He covered her hand with his. "I'll do my best to come back. But if I don't, if this goes wrong, make sure Samuel and Michael are taken care of. Make sure those veterans get their land back. You'll come back." "You have to. You owe me 2 weeks' rent," he smiled despite the tension. "Yes, ma'am. By 7 o'clock, 40 people had assembled in the street, some on horses, some in wagons, some on foot, veterans wearing pieces of old uniforms, merchants in their work clothes, women who'd brought their husbands, even a few children. Though Martha and Evelyn had tried to convince families to leave them behind, Cole stood on the boarding house porch, looking at the crowd. These were the people he'd left behind 8 years ago, the people who'd needed him and whom he'd failed. Now they were ready to stand with him, to face danger for the principle that justice mattered more than comfort. Sheriff Dalton rode up, Deputy Reed beside him. Judge Morrison sends his regards and his respect. Said he'll expedite the full hearing if we can get Keller to stand down today. Then let's go remind Mr. Keller that the war really is over, Cole said, and that this valley belongs to all its people, not just the ones who hate the hardest. They rode out in a column, civilians and soldiers, men and women, young and old. Not an army but a community, not seeking violence but prepared for it, carrying in their hearts the simple conviction that some things, honor, justice, home, were worth fighting for. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, burning off morning fog, revealing the valley in all its autumn glory. Beautiful country, worth protecting, worth the sacrifice men like Samuel had made, worth finishing what should have been finished years ago. The Chambers Ranch gate appeared ahead, iron letters spelling out legacy in the morning light. Cole thought about what legacy meant. What a man left behind, what people remembered. Marcus Chambers had tried to leave a legacy built on revenge and stolen valor. Today, they'd show that such legacies didn't last, that truth and justice, though they moved slowly, eventually won, or at least that's what Cole hoped. What he'd bet everything on, what he'd come down from his mountain to prove. The gate stood open. Beyond it, Dutch Keller and his men were waiting. Cole's instincts, honed by years of combat, moved faster than conscious thought. He was diving from his saddle before Keller's gun fully cleared leather, hitting the ground and rolling toward a water trough that offered cover. Around him, chaos erupted, people shouting, horses rearing, the sharp crack of gunfire splitting the morning air. Sheriff Dalton's voice boomed above the noise. "Hold your fire! Everyone hold your fire!" But it was too late for orders. Keller's shot went wide, missing Cole by inches. Jig Mercer fired toward the townspeople, his bullet kicking up dirt near Robert Hayes. The 2 other Confederates raised their weapons, and then Samuel Pritchard's voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding despite his age. "Cease fire! Nobody else shoots!" The old soldier had ridden forward, putting himself between the 2 groups, his arms spread wide. He sat his horse like he'd once sat it during the war, back straight, face calm, completely unafraid. It was either the bravest or most foolish thing Cole had ever seen. The sheer audacity of it froze everyone. Keller's gun was still raised, but he wasn't firing. The townspeople had drawn weapons, but held them pointed at the ground. Even Mercer and the 2 Confederates seemed uncertain, thrown off by Samuel's unexpected intervention. "Listen to me," Samuel said, his voice carrying with the authority of a man who'd earned the right to be heard. "I'm Samuel Pritchard. Some of you know me. Mr. Keller certainly knows me. He ordered my barn burned 2 nights ago." He turned to look at Keller. "You wanted to scare me off my land. You wanted me to run. Well, I'm not running. None of us are running. Get out of the way, old man," Keller snarled. "This doesn't concern you. Doesn't concern me. You stole my land. You burned my barn. You threatened my grandson. How does that not concern me?" Samuel's voice rose. "But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to tell you something important, something you need to hear." Cole used the moment to move closer to Evelyn, making sure she was shielded behind a wagon. Dalton had positioned himself to protect the civilians. The ranch hands who'd defected were backing away from the line of fire. The confrontation had stabilized into a tense standoff, everyone waiting to see what Samuel would say. "I fought in the war," Samuel continued. "I know what you lost. I know because I was there when Sherman marched through. I saw the destruction. I saw families homeless, crops burned, everything gone. It was terrible. It was brutal. And yes, I was part of it." He paused, letting that admission sink in. "But you know what else I saw? I saw Confederate soldiers doing the same thing, raiding Union towns, burning farms, killing civilians. The war was brutal on both sides. Nobody's hands were clean. They invaded our country, one of the Confederates behind Keller shouted. They started it. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how far back you want to go assigning blame. Samuel's voice was patient, almost gentle. But here's what I know for certain. At some point, the killing has to stop. At some point, someone has to say, enough. The war ended 16 years ago. Most of us, North and South, we accepted that. We moved on. We tried to build something new. He turned his attention fully to Keller. But you didn't, did you? You and Marcus Chambers, you kept fighting, kept hating. You turned this valley into your own private battlefield. And for what? What did it accomplish, except more suffering? More families hurt. More children like my grandson growing up learning to hate? Keller's gun wavered slightly. Something in Samuel's words was reaching him, breaking through the armor of certainty. I could hate you, Samuel said quietly. God knows I have reason, but I'm tired, Mr. Keller. I'm tired of hate. I'm tired of fighting. I just want to live on my land in peace. Want my grandson to grow up without this poison in his heart. Is that so much to ask? For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was wind through the grass and the nervous shifting of horses. Cole watched Keller's face, saw the internal struggle playing out, years of hatred and purpose warring with the simple humanity of Samuel's plea. Then Keller lowered his gun, not holstering it but pointing it at the ground. His face was anguished, twisted with emotions Cole recognized from his own journey, the pain of letting go of something you've built your identity around. You don't understand, Keller said, and his voice was thick. Marcus and I, we made a vow. After Marlowe died at Silver Ridge, after the war ended and they made us surrender, we vowed to never stop fighting, to make them pay. Every day we continued, his work was honoring him, honoring all of them who died. Then you're honoring ghosts by creating more ghosts, Cole said, stepping into the open. Honoring the dead by hurting the living. That's not honor, Mr. Keller. That's just making the same mistake over and over. Keller looked at Cole. Really looked at him, perhaps for the first time, seeing not an enemy, but another soldier who'd survived a terrible war. What would you have me do? Just give up? Admit that everything we fought for was wrong. Admit that the fighting's over, that continuing it only spreads the pain. Cole moved closer, his hands visible and empty. You were a soldier, a good one probably. You followed orders, did your duty, believed in your cause. None of that was wrong. You were loyal to your people. But the cause is gone, Mr. Keller. The Confederacy is gone. Continuing to fight for it doesn't resurrect it. It just kills more of the present for a past that can't be changed. Jake Mercer raised his gun again. Dutch, don't listen to him. We finish this. No. Keller's voice was final. Samuel's right. It's time for this to end. He looked at his 3 remaining supporters.
Stand down.
All of you. That's an order. But Dutch, Mercer protested. I said stand down. Keller's command voice, honed by years of military service, brooked no argument. Slowly, reluctantly, Mercer and the other 2 lowered their weapons. Keller turned to Sheriff Dalton. I'll go with you. Answer your questions about the fire. Face whatever charges come. Then to Evelyn. I'm sorry, ma'am. I thought I was serving your husband's vision, protecting his legacy. I was wrong. Evelyn's face was streaked with tears. Thank you for stopping this, for choosing, her voice caught, for choosing to let it end. Samuel rode his horse close to Keller. For a moment, the old Union veteran and the Confederate foreman faced each other, enemies separated by a war that should have ended years ago. Then Samuel extended his hand. No more fighting, Samuel asked. Keller stared at the offered hand. Cole could see the struggle. Years of hate and loyalty warring with the simple offer of peace. Finally, slowly, Keller reached out and gripped Samuel's hand. No more fighting, he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. The tension broke like a storm cloud dissipating. People lowered weapons. The townspeople began talking among themselves. Some were crying with relief. Dalton moved forward to take Keller into custody, not roughly, but with the quiet efficiency of a lawman doing necessary work. Cole felt his legs go weak. He leaned against the water trough, suddenly exhausted in the way that follows intense danger. They'd been seconds from a massacre, seconds from violence that would have scarred this valley for another generation. And somehow, through Samuel's courage and Keller's final wisdom, they'd stepped back from that edge. Evelyn approached, her face transformed by relief and residual fear. "Is it over? Is it really over?" "The fighting's over," Cole said. "The work's just beginning. Returning land, making restitution, healing the damage. That'll take years. But yes, the fighting's over." She touched his arm. "Thank you for coming back, for not giving up on us. Thanks, Samuel. He's the one who stopped it. I was ready to—" Cole didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They both knew how close he'd come to violence, to answering hatred with bullets. Samuel rode over, looking older and more tired than Cole had ever seen him, but also somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. "Captain, I think I'd like to go home now. Check on my land. Start planning how to rebuild that barn." Michael, who'd been watching from the safety of the crowd, ran forward. "Can we really go home, Grandpa? Really stay this time?" "Yes, boy. We can really stay. Nobody's pushing us off our land. Not anymore." Cole watched the two of them, old soldier and young boy, embrace in the morning sun, and felt something break open in his chest. 8 years. 8 years he'd wasted hiding in the mountains, convinced he couldn't make a difference, convinced the world was too broken to fix. He'd been wrong. The world was broken, yes, but broken things could be repaired. With courage, with wisdom, with people like Samuel who'd choose understanding over revenge. The war was finally over. The real war, the one fought in hearts and minds, the one that continued long after the guns fell silent. It had taken 16 years, and the courage of an old soldier to finally end it, but it was done. Finished. At last. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation at the Chambers Ranch, and Silver Ridge Valley had settled into a new rhythm. Not perfect, but better, honest, built on truth rather than lies, on justice rather than revenge. Cole stood on the ridge overlooking Samuel's farm on an October afternoon, watching as the new barn took shape. The whole valley had turned out to help rebuild it. Men from town, ranch hands from the Chambers property, even some of the former Confederate soldiers who'd stood with Keller. Working side by side, former enemies raising timber frames and hammering nails, their labor a kind of penance and healing combined. Dutch Keller had pled guilty to arson and several counts of intimidation. Judge Morrison, taking into account his service during the war and his ultimate choice to stand down, had sentenced him to 2 years in the territorial prison. Before he was taken away, he'd asked to speak with Samuel. Cole had been present for that conversation, had watched 2 old soldiers find something approaching forgiveness in the ruins of what might have been. "I'm sorry," Keller had said simply, "for all of it. For continuing a war that should have ended. For hurting you and yours." Samuel had nodded, his expression grave but not cruel. "I accept your apology, and I hope, when you get out, you'll find a way to live that doesn't require hate to give it meaning. I'll try. Can't promise more than that. Trying's enough. That's all any of us can do." Now, standing on the ridge, Cole thought about trying, about how it was the foundation of everything worthwhile. Samuel had tried to hold on to his land against impossible odds. Evelyn had tried to face truth, even when it destroyed her assumptions. The town had tried to stand up for justice, despite fear of economic consequences. And Cole himself had tried to come down from his mountain and make amends for 8 years of hiding. The land claims had been resolved through a combination of legal action and Evelyn's voluntary restitution. Every veteran who'd been defrauded received their property back, along with compensation for years of lost productivity. The process was overseen by Judge Morrison, with testimony from the land office clerk Hodges, who turned state's evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence. The Chambers Ranch remained under Evelyn's ownership, but she'd transformed its operation. Robert Hayes was permanent foreman now, running things with fairness and competence. The profits, once hoarded by Marcus, were being shared more equitably with workers and reinvested in the community. Evelyn herself had moved into a smaller house in town, unable to continue living in the mansion that had been built on stolen foundations. "I'll sell it eventually," she'd told Cole during one of their conversations. "Use the money to establish a fund for veterans' families. It's what Marcus should have done in the first place, honored their service instead of punishing it." Cole heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Sheriff Dalton climbing the ridge, slightly out of breath from the steep path. "Thought I'd find you up here," Dalton said, settling onto a boulder. "You always did like the high ground. Old habits. Military training never quite leaves you." "No, I suppose it doesn't." Dalton pulled out a pipe and tobacco, taking his time filling it. "Town council met last night. They'd like to offer you the deputy position again. With Clayton Reed heading to Copper Creek to study law, we'll need someone. I'm not sure I'm the right man for that." "You're exactly the right man." "You've proven that?" Cole shook his head. "What I proved is that I'm decent in a crisis. But day-to-day peacekeeping? That requires a different kind of patience. A different temperament. You've got more patience than you think. You spent 8 years alone on a mountain, didn't you? That takes patience. Or at least a very specific kind of stubbornness." Dalton lit his pipe, smoke curling into the afternoon air. "But if the deputy job doesn't suit, there's other work. Town needs a lot of things. Teachers, craftsmen, someone to organize the veterans into a proper support group." "That last one has promise," Cole admitted. "Maybe I could do some good there. Help men transition from military service to civilian life. God knows I could have used that kind of help 16 years ago. We all could have." Dalton was quiet for a moment, watching the barn raising below. "You know what I've learned doing this job for 30 years? The war never really ends for the men who fought it. It changes, takes different forms, but it stays with you. Best thing we can do is help each other carry that weight. Make something useful out of it, instead of letting it turn to poison." Cole thought about his cavalry jacket, now hanging in his room at the boarding house. He'd worn it once since the confrontation to Samuel's barn raising, then put it away. Not hidden this time, just preserved. A reminder of who he'd been, who he'd become, and the long road between those two versions of himself. "I'm thinking about staying," Cole said. "Not going back to the mountain. Maybe building something here, small house on the edge of town, close enough to help but with room to breathe." Dalton smiled around his pipe stem. "Martha Hayes will be pleased to hear that. She's been hoping you'd stick around. Mentioned it to me 3 times already." Cole felt his face warm. Martha had been kind to him, patient with his silences, and understanding of his need for space. There was something there. Not romance exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it. The chance to build connections, to have something more than solitude, one step at a time, Cole said. "First I help finish that barn, then I figure out what comes next." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd found a kind of peace in service and duty. Below them, the sound of hammers and saws filled the afternoon, the sound of building, of healing, of a community knitting itself back together. Michael appeared on the ridge, climbing with the easy energy of youth. "Mr. Tanner, Grandpa says the frame's ready to raise. He wants you down there for it. Says you earned the right to help set the cornerstone." Cole stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Tell him I'm honored. I'll be right down." The boy hesitated. "Mr. Tanner, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you really going to stay in Silver Ridge?" "Because," Michael's voice wavered slightly, "because I'd like that. I'd like having you around. Maybe you could teach me things. About being strong. About standing up for what's right even when it's scary." Cole felt his throat tighten. "I'd be honored to teach you, Michael. And yes, I think I am going to stay. Turns out running away doesn't solve much. Better to stand and build than hide and regret." Michael's face split into a grin. "Grandpa's going to be so happy. He talks about you all the time, about the war, about how you saved him. He says you're the best man he's ever known. Your grandfather's the best man I've ever known. All I did was show up. He's the one who had real courage, choosing understanding over hate. That's harder than any battle I ever fought." They walked down the ridge together, the aging captain and the young boy, 2 generations linked by service and sacrifice and the slow, difficult work of healing. The valley spread before them in autumn glory, golden grass and turning leaves, the mountains rising in the distance like sentinels watching over everything. At the barn site, Samuel waved them over. "Captain! We're ready for you." The framework stood tall against the sky, fresh timber that smelled of pine resin and new beginnings. 20 men held ropes attached to the final wall section, waiting for the signal to raise it. It was the moment when a barn became real, when scattered pieces became something solid and lasting. "On my count," Robert Hayes called. 1, 2, 3! The wall rose smoothly, guided by steady hands and coordinated effort. It settled into place with a satisfying thud, and someone started cheering. The sound spread through the crowd. Veterans and townspeople, former enemies and new friends, all celebrating this small victory of rebuilding. Samuel put his arm around Cole's shoulders. "Thank you," he said simply, "for coming back, for not giving up on us, for remembering that some promises should never be broken. I should have come back sooner. You came back when you were ready, when you could do the most good. That's what matters." Samuel looked at his new barn, at his grandson laughing with other children, at the community that had come together. "You gave me back my home, Captain. More than that, you gave me back my faith in people, in the idea that things can be made right, even after they've been broken for a long time." Cole thought about his cabin on the mountain, about 8 years of self-imposed exile, about all the time he'd wasted convincing himself that some wrongs couldn't be righted. He'd been so wrong. With effort, with courage, with people willing to try, almost anything could be repaired. As the sun set over Silver Ridge Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Cole Tanner stood among his people and felt something he hadn't felt in 8 years. Home. Not just a place but a belonging. Not just survival but purpose. Not just existence but life. He'd come down from his mountain a broken man, pretending to be whole. He'd leave this day still imperfect, still carrying scars, but honest about his wounds and committed to healing them. Not alone this time, surrounded by others who understood that the hardest battles were the ones fought in your own heart, and that victory wasn't measured in enemies defeated, but in connections restored. The mountain man had become something better, a man among men, a citizen among citizens. A soul no longer hidden but present and accounted for. Some legends walked among us disguised as ordinary men, people said. But Cole had learned a different truth. All men were ordinary until they chose to be otherwise. Until they decided that honor mattered more than comfort, that truth was worth the cost, and that standing up, even when standing up was hardest, was what separated living from merely surviving. You could polish silver all you liked, but truth didn't shine less in the dirt. It just waited, patient and persistent, for someone brave enough to uncover it. Cole Tanner had found his truth at last. And in finding it, he'd found his way home, the end.